I have no involvement with the Epstein matter. Prince Andrew and Meghan do. She made an advance toward me. I did not respond. That's all I'm going to.
It began with a single sentence that instantly froze the room. Kevin Costner, a man known for restraint rather than provocation, was asked a routine question about guest lists for his upcoming Santa Barbara charity event. Instead of deflecting, he drew a line. Meghan Markle would not be attending. And then, without raising his voice or dressing it up, he added something that changed the temperature entirely. He wanted no association with certain controversies, and he made it clear that any perceived links did not involve him. The implication hung heavy, not because it was detailed, but because it was deliberate. What makes this moment so combustible is not what was said, but who said it. Costner has spent decades navigating Hollywood without scandal, carefully protecting his reputation and his causes. When someone like that chooses clarity over courtesy, insiders take notice. Sources close to the event insist this was not a spontaneous slip, but a calculated boundary drawn in advance. He wanted no narrative confusion, no speculation about why certain names were missing, no pressure from agencies or social circles to soften the message. The contrast is striking. Meghan's public image has long revolved around reinvention and resilience, a woman carving space in powerful rooms. Yet Hollywood operates on unspoken rules, and one of them is discretion. According to multiple accounts from within Santa Barbara's elite charity circuit, discomfort had been building quietly for years. Invitations extended, then retracted. Roles discussed, then quietly reassigned. Smiles maintained in public, distance enforced in private. Costner's statement simply dragged those dynamics into the open.
Crucially, this was framed as personal experience, not accusation. An advance declined, a boundary enforced. That distinction matters because it shifts the conversation from scandal to pattern. In gossip ecosystems, patterns are everything. One rumor fades, several aligned accounts begin to harden into narrative. And Costner's words did not exist in isolation. They landed on top of years of whispers about networking that blurred lines, about ambition that sometimes unsettled the very people it aimed to impress. The timing also matters. Santa Barbara is not Los Angeles. It is quieter, more insulated, and far less tolerant of spectacle. Charity events there are built on trust, not headlines. Organizers prize causes over cameras. According to insiders, anything that risks shifting focus away from first responders and toward personal drama is quietly filtered out. From that perspective, exclusion becomes less about punishment and more about preservation. What followed the interview was predictable. Clips spread. Commentators dissected tone. Supporters and critics split instantly. Some framed Costner as standing up for boundaries in an era hypersensitive to power dynamics. Others accused him of fueling speculation by refusing to elaborate. But the damage, or the clarity, depending on where one stands, was already done. This was no longer about an invitation. It was about credibility, proximity, and the unspoken hierarchies of influence. And once a figure like Costner steps back publicly, it signals something deeper shifting beneath the surface.
To understand why this moment resonated so widely, you have to look beyond the interview and into the ecosystem that surrounds elite charity culture. These events are not casual mixers. They are carefully calibrated spaces where reputation matters more than celebrity, and where access is quietly rationed. According to multiple insiders familiar with the Santa Barbara circuit, inclusion is rarely about fame alone. It's about predictability, discretion, and whether a presence enhances or destabilizes the purpose of the gathering. In that context, exclusion speaks louder than invitation. Whispers about Meghan's approach to networking have circulated for years, long before royal titles entered the picture. Former industry figures describe a style that was confident, persistent, and sometimes unsettling to those unaccustomed to being pursued outside traditional channels. In Hollywood, ambition is expected, but there's a fine line between strategic and intrusive, and that line is often policed silently. When boundaries are crossed, the response is rarely confrontation, it's distance. Calls unanswered, invitations delayed, doors that quietly stop opening. What made Costner's remarks so disruptive is that they interrupted that silent process. By acknowledging a personal boundary and declining to address it up, he converted private discomfort into public awareness. Importantly, he did not accuse, embellish, or dramatize. He stated his position and moved on. That restraint is precisely what gave the moment weight. Gossip thrives on excess. This landed because it avoided it. As the clip circulated, older anecdotes resurfaced, not as proof, but as context. Accounts from previous charity events, industry dinners, and informal gatherings were re-examined through a new lens. People began connecting dots that had never been formally drawn, not because new facts emerged, but because a credible figure had acknowledged an experience many suspected was not unique. In gossip culture, credibility doesn't require confirmation, it requires alignment. The mention of controversial associations added another layer, not because details were offered, but because of timing. The royal family has spent years attempting to distance itself from past scandals tied to figures like Prince Andrew. Any perceived proximity to those shadows, even by implication, triggers heightened sensitivity. Observers noted that Costner appeared intent on clarifying where he did not stand, rather than making claims about anyone else. Yet in doing so, he reignited dormant conversations that institutions prefer remain buried. For Meghan, this moment is particularly precarious. Her public narrative emphasizes empowerment and independence, themes that resonate strongly with supporters. But empowerment narratives depend on moral clarity. When ambiguity enters, even without evidence, momentum falters. Hollywood is unforgiving in this way. It does not wait for verdicts, it responds to discomfort. Meanwhile, Harry's relative absence from these circles has not gone unnoticed. His solo appearances at recent events contrast sharply with earlier joint outings, reinforcing speculation about shifting dynamics. Whether this reflects personal choice, strategic distance, or logistical coincidence remains unclear, but perception fills gaps quickly, especially when silence dominates. What's emerging is not a scandal with a single accusation, but a mosaic of unease. Small moments, individually dismissible, now arranged into a pattern that invites scrutiny. Costner did not create that pattern, he merely refused to ignore it. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that in elite spaces, reputation is not defended loudly. It is protected by who chooses to step back and when. What makes this situation especially volatile is how little has been officially said in response. Silence in celebrity culture is often strategic. In gossip culture, it is interpreted as confirmation, denial, confusion, and calculation all at once. Meghan's camp has offered no direct rebuttal to Costner's remarks, no clarification, no reframing. That absence has allowed speculation to expand unchecked, filling the vacuum with interpretation rather than fact. Supporters argue that dignified silence prevents escalation. Critics see it as avoidance. Both readings now coexist, amplifying tension rather than resolving it. Behind the scenes, however, silence rarely means inactivity. Industry observers suggest that quiet damage control is likely underway. Conversations with agents, event organizers, and philanthropic partners become more urgent in moments like this. Reputational repair does not happen publicly first. It happens through reassurance, explanation, and repositioning in private. The challenge is that once a boundary has been stated publicly by a respected figure, reassurance has limits. You cannot undo a refusal. You can only attempt to prevent it from becoming precedent. This is where the royal context complicates matters. Meghan is not simply navigating Hollywood. She is navigating it while carrying the symbolic weight of monarchy, whether she claims it or not. Every interaction is filtered through assumptions about privilege, access, and intention. When boundaries are enforced against her, they are rarely interpreted as neutral. They become statements about power, entitlement, and belonging. That burden does not apply equally to others, and it intensifies every misstep.
Harry's position within this dynamic is increasingly complex. Sources close to royal watchers note that his credibility in elite, non-royal spaces was once his greatest asset. He represented a bridge between institutions. Recently, that bridge appears strained. His absence from key conversations, intentional or otherwise, has left Meghan more exposed to interpretation without his contextual buffer. Whether this is strategic separation or emotional distance remains speculative, but perception is already shifting. The Santa Barbara setting continues to loom large in analysis because it represents a kind of social truth serum. Wealthy, influential, and deeply protective of privacy, its culture does not reward provocation. Those who violate its norms are not confronted, they are quietly excluded. Costner's statement, then, was less an act of aggression and more an acknowledgement that exclusion had already occurred. He simply confirmed it out loud. Online reactions reveal a widening divide. Some view this as further evidence of systemic bias, a powerful man reinforcing invisible walls. Others see it as overdue honesty in an industry that too often hides behind politeness while enforcing double standards. Both arguments gain traction because the facts are sparse. Ambiguity is the oxygen of gossip. What cannot be ignored is how quickly the narrative expanded beyond the original remark. This is no longer about one event or one invitation. It has become a referendum on belonging, credibility, and the cost of relentless visibility. For public figures built on controlled storytelling, moments like this are destabilizing. They expose the limits of narrative authority. As speculation continues, the stakes rise not through new revelations, but through repetition. Each discussion compounds the last. Each retelling sharpens interpretation. And in the absence of clear resolution, the story evolves on its own terms, driven less by evidence than by discomfort. What shifts this story from uncomfortable to combustible is the way credibility is being assigned. Kevin Costner is not a tabloid regular. He does not trade in provocation, nor does he rely on controversy to remain relevant. That distinction matters. In celebrity ecosystems, the messenger often determines how seriously a claim is taken. When allegations or implications come from figures known for spectacle, they are discounted. When they come from figures known for restraint, they linger. Costner's public image has long been built on steadiness. He represents old-guard Hollywood, where discretion was currency and reputation was guarded fiercely. That is precisely why his words are being treated not as gossip, but as validation of something previously unspoken. He did not embellish. He did not editorialize. He stated a boundary and moved on. That brevity is what gave the moment its weight. Within elite circles, reactions were reportedly swift but quiet. Invitations recalibrated, guest lists reconsidered, charitable boards reassessed optics. None of this requires public statements. In these spaces, decisions are communicated through absence. Doors stop opening, calls stop being returned, association becomes conditional. These shifts rarely announce themselves, but they shape trajectories decisively.
For Meghan, this represents a uniquely difficult bind. Her brand has been built on visibility, narrative control, and moral framing. Moments like this resist all three. You cannot narrate exclusion without confirming it exists. You cannot frame silence without letting others define it. And you cannot claim empowerment when rejection becomes the headline. Even supporters are forced into defensive posture rather than celebration. The Hollywood royal hybrid identity that once differentiated her now complicates her positioning. Hollywood tolerates ambition, but punishes perceived entitlement. Royal association invites scrutiny, but offers protection. Existing between the two exposes one to the harshest standards of both. Costner's rejection reads, to many observers, as Hollywood drawing a line it feels entitled to enforce. Meanwhile, Harry's absence from this narrative has become conspicuous. He is neither defending nor contextualizing. For a couple once defined by unified messaging, this silence is being interpreted as distance, whether fair or not. In gossip ecosystems, absence is never neutral. It becomes evidence of strain, disagreement, or strategy. Each interpretation weakens the perception of cohesion. What intensifies matters further is timing. The entertainment industry is increasingly cautious. Philanthropy is scrutinized, associations are audited. Optics matter more than intent. In such an environment, even unproven implications can trigger distancing. Costner's comments did not create suspicion, they activated existing caution. Social media analysis shows a shift from curiosity to consolidation. Early reactions asked what happened. Later reactions assert that something must have happened. This is how reputational damage metastasizes, not through proof, but through consensus fatigue. People stop questioning and start assuming. There is also a gendered tension beneath the discourse. Critics argue that assertiveness is reframed as impropriety when exercised by women. Supporters counter that repeated boundary violations deserve acknowledgement regardless of gender. Both arguments are being weaponized selectively, turning nuance into ammunition. Ultimately, this section of the saga is not about allegations. It is about power dynamics made visible. Who gets to refuse publicly? Who absorbs the fallout privately? Who controls the narrative after the door closes? And once doors close quietly, reopening them is rarely a public affair.
By the time the dust settles, what remains is not a scandal frozen in a single quote, but a broader recalibration of status. Hollywood does not exile loudly, it fades people out. The most damaging outcome is not condemnation, but irrelevance within influential rooms. Costner's refusal, understated and final, operates precisely in that register. It does not accuse, it excludes. And exclusion, in elite ecosystems, is irreversible more often than forgiveness. For Meghan, the challenge ahead is not rebuttal, but repositioning. Denials would only magnify the claim. Silence preserves ambiguity, but concedes narrative space. Attempts at re-entry into elite philanthropic or entertainment circles risk reinforcing the very perception she needs to escape. This is the paradox of modern celebrity. The more aggressively one curates an image, the more fragile that image becomes under pressure. What observers are witnessing now is a slow migration of discourse. Early stories framed this as interpersonal discomfort. Later analysis reframed it as pattern recognition. Now it is being contextualized as institutional response. When institutions adjust behavior, individual explanations stop mattering. Invitations dry up, collaborations stall, support becomes conditional or disappears entirely.
This is where the royal dimension complicates matters further. The monarchy operates on symbolism, continuity, and containment. It cannot afford repeated associations with unresolved controversy. Even rumors, when persistent and externally validated, create governance problems. That is why palace silence is not neutrality, but calculation. Every word spoken risks acknowledgement. Every word withheld allows distance. Costner's statement inadvertently gave the palace something it rarely gets, an external boundary setter. Someone outside royal politics, beyond tabloid incentives, articulating rejection without malice. That matters. It reframes the issue as reputational risk management rather than family conflict. In institutional terms, that is actionable. Harry's trajectory, meanwhile, appears increasingly separate. His engagements emphasize legacy causes, duty-adjacent work, and personal history. These choices suggest an awareness of optics, whether self-directed or advised. Separation, even informal, can function as a reputational firewall. In public narratives, distance becomes interpretation. Online discourse has already shifted accordingly. Commentary now centers less on whether Costner spoke truthfully and more on why so many doors appear to be closing simultaneously. That shift marks the end of debate and the beginning of consensus. Consensus does not require evidence, it requires repetition, credible messengers, and silence from those implicated. Supporters continue to argue misogyny, racial bias, and double standards. Critics cite behavior, access, and repeated discomfort among powerful men. Both sides will persist, but institutions do not adjudicate moral arguments, they assess risk. And risk, once identified, is mitigated through disengagement. The final irony is that this story began with charity, a space meant to transcend ego, ambition, and hierarchy. Instead, it exposed how deeply those forces operate beneath benevolent branding. Costner's charity survived untouched. His reputation emerged reinforced. Others were not so fortunate. This is not an ending. It is a narrowing, a reduction of available paths, a quiet verdict delivered without court, headline, or apology. And in worlds governed by perception rather than proof, that is often the most decisive outcome of all.